the wonderful way that God's kingdom works, his economy, we come up short because we're not him.
Yeah.
And so we can, when we have our conversation with our children, right, about how we've come up short and let them down, we're human, we're not God.
Yes.
So if anything, maybe our shortcomings point to a need for God.
Amen.
With God, there is always more. More love, more life, more freedom. Welcome to Zoe's Exploring More with Michael Thompson. C.S. Lewis once wrote, "Our Heavenly Father has provided many delightful inns for us along our journey, but He takes great care to see that we do not mistake any of them for home." Join me and the team as we explore the kingdom together, discovering the deep truths and offering encouragement for the journey. There is always more.
Welcome, friends and allies, to the Exploring More podcast. Michael Thompson hanging out with the posse, with the gang, with the dudes.
This might be the most we've had around the table.
Yeah. Well, I think 4 is about the most we do. Anyway, 3 or 4. But hey, you might recognize my friend Keith Daniel, and then of course the fabulous S.J. Jennings,
ubiquitous,
and then the Warrior King Josh Overton. So we're here talking about kind of the overarching title is Redeeming Generational Masculinity, which we've been talking about now for some weeks and months because God's really put it on our hearts, on our shoulders, and in our hands to enter into this mission. You know, what does that look like? And we're actually experiencing it somewhat at this table. We've got some generations, and we've got some aged. We had the elder sages on. Mm-hmm. We had Jimmy Mack and Tom on to talk about that stage, and the Warriors will be on. You'll be back, so representing the young Warriors. But this is kind of a King Me book series, conversations, if you will, about some of the stages of the masculine journey, and the king stage, particularly, is a man in his 40s and 50s. So we've got other podcasts that talk about that, and I just would...
The stages of
I'd
masculinity,
say if you can just put those in the lower thirds, send them to those places. Otherwise, we spend a lot of time really defining the king stage. But just to say, it's this 40s and 50s, early 60s before the elder sage comes in. And it comes in after the warrior stage, which we'll talk about next week with Caleb in front of the camera rather than behind the camera, and Josh. But I'm just going to ask you, SJ, before we take this quick break, what does this stage mean to you? Why do you think this is as just a significant stage?
Yeah. Let me say before that I answer that question, there's been a lot of interaction with this topic. Josh was talking with us about some of our stats. Caleb was too beforehand. So there's something going on in the kingdom in the area of redeeming generational masculinity, I think. And so it's resonating.
And the
with people.
social
It's
outlets,
awesome.
the social media spaces.
Man, we're getting a lot of engagement
Facebook
with it.
and YouTube and different places. Yeah, it's awesome.
But I think the king stage is, there's so much going on in this stage of life that is outward focused. That is, when you've reached your 40s, your 50s, early 60s, most of the time you've built up a kingdom, right? And whatever that kingdom might look like, you might have a bunch of kids, you might have no kids, you might, whatever your kingdom looks like, but you've got a position of authority over people, places. You've got levels of responsibility that you don't necessarily have in earlier stages and later stages as kids tend to leave and start their own families. And so there's a weight to it. There's a weightiness to it. The other thing I would say has been my discovery in the middle stages that I'm in right now of the king stage. I will say this till the cows come home. The king stage is all about healing.
There's a lot of recovery.
There's an opportunity for healing for your own heart, for the hearts of your family members, even going back and trying to pursue your parents. Or we were with a guy for a couple of days over the last couple of days, Michael, where we're trying to help him see what happened to him at 55, so he can
in his formative years,
see
right.
the system that's been at work for so long. I've been getting texts from him all day long. He's so excited about the freedom that he's feeling. So healing is, to me, what the King stage is central on.
So before we take a quick break, I thought of I amen to all of that, but I was thinking, Keith, about you can tell a king stage. You tell you're in the king stage by when you move. You cannot get all your crap in the trunk of your car, like warrior stage. And I know Josh started early in the warrior stage with responsibilities, being a young married and kids. But I mean, a king, you got to pretty much you're pulling up a moving van, and you're old enough that you better have some young guys.
Yeah, that image of the little car with a bunch of stuff stacked
you just
on
moved
top,
your daughter, right? And
you can't do
what
that
did it
anymore.
take? A couple cars?
Yeah, if that. Maybe.
To move her in?
Yeah, we gave her one of our heavy tables, and we were laughing because the table was 100 pounds. I was like, Madison, even Madison, again, he's in the warrior stage. He's like, Dad,
I don't want to lift that. Yeah, we don't lift. Hopefully you're at a stage where you can pay other people to lift.
Earlier today we were moving furniture around.
I know, around
the warriors were doing all the heavy lifting.
So we'll be right
you guys lift.
We did.
Yeah, we did.
Y'all got it.
I had a call.
Yeah.
So we'll be right back with the Exploring More podcast to talk about the King stage.
I feel like God made me for this, and I feel like God positioned me for this. I spent a lot of years in my life doing things for which I had skill and some interest, but I feel like I've turned a corner now at this point in my life, in my mid-60s, where these pieces are coming together, and to hear about the Elder Sage Initiative and to hear about the possibility of continuing to do things that somehow instinctively or by God's Spirit and leading I'd already been doing, but to say, wow, we could expand this pool. The rings can get larger. We can go from 20 guys to 50 to 2,000. It just excites me about the possibility that other people, through this initiative, even through this video thing that we're doing, could catch a vision for this, or could hear inside their own spirit God saying, as He said to me, I made you for this. You may not yet have sensed it, but hear now the invitation.
Welcome back to the Exploring More podcast. In the Redeeming Generational Masculinity, kind of under that banner, we're going through the stages of masculinity, and I brought some good friends to talk about the King stage. And so this in the book King Me, there's a couple chapters, 5 talking about the heart of a king, and then chapter 9 really talks about the King stage.
Yeah.
And so, we throw this around a little bit because when you're in a culture and you have if you're on a team or you're in a certain space, you have things that you say.
Yeah.
And you know what they mean. But when we talk about the heart of a king, and you were talking about this before the break, healing, there's a recovery aspect to this stage. There's a healing aspect to this. And one of the things that we say, or like we like to offer, is getting your heart back. So you don't have to talk about it in the context necessarily of the King stage, which you did set up, SJ. But Josh, Keith, what does that even mean to you? Describe for our viewers, our listeners, just getting your heart back. We were talking about the emotional aspect of this stage and how you feel, and what's on display at this stage, and how that, and sometimes that's not as good as we wanted it to be. So anyway, when you hear all of that, where do you go?
Yeah, we've been doing this a long time, and I feel like I remember the weight of this question. This is 2004, 2005 when it was first sort of put out there. And the first reaction is, I don't know, I'm not sure that it's lost, And, what I was thinking about with this stage, as SJ kind of evoked, was I do need to be in touch with my emotional side, my feeling side. Because, again, I'm raised and socialized playing a sport like football. You play hurt, and you play on.
Wow.
And we didn't, in my day, we didn't have kind of the administrative circle that's around like trainers and, you know, counselors. I mean, now there's a whole kind of constellation of folks around, you know, college athletes anyway, and probably more so. But I think of get my heart back, and that I really have to sit a long time with myself to process that. And you're right. Hopefully by the time I'm 40 or in my 50s, I've done that work. But that's really uncommon.
Yeah, it is.
Unless you've been forced to that place, right? Like, I mean, you really have been like incapacitated. And I know what that feels like for someone to say, tell me where it hurts. And I'm like, I've been hurting so long that I'm not even sure I know where to start.
I'm numb to it.
You're asking me, like even going to a physician, I had my checkup and they get more serious every year. And, you know, I'm like, okay, I need to be making sure under the hood things are, you know, being addressed, but I might not really know that.
Yeah.
And there's a fear to that. I mean, there's a lot of trepidation. And I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but as we were thinking about this conversation today, question about, you know, where are you not, I don't know if it was hiding, but in the chapter, where are you passive? Yeah. And I'm like, if I'm honest, I really don't want to open up. And I've told Lorna, my wife of 30 years, this many times, I don't want to. You know, I really don't want to talk about all of the pressures of, quote, the kingdom God has given me reign over. But I have to be invited there, believing that there is a healer, a balm that can address any brokenness that may be revealed or may be more revealed, right? It's kind of like, I know many people, and I'll try to stop here because you tap the rock. In the Black community, fear of going to the medical profession is real historically because of exploitation there. So when I've had family members, they will never go to a doctor. I don't want to be told I have something. Yeah. That I have a problem that needs to be. I'd rather be, quote, in the dark around that. Yeah. You know, so there's a constellation of, I think, the challenge to that question. Yeah. Get the heart. What do you mean, get it back?
Yeah. It's been through so much. As we were talking about that friend that we got to spend a couple days with intensively. Oh my gosh. I want to affirm that idea of play hurt and play on. Crap. I've never heard you say that, but I know how that made me just feel. And so it does. You know, my mom just passed, and the ability to talk about it. You know, I mean, there's a lot of people like, hey, I can text, I'm so sorry I heard, and, you know, nothing like the love of a mother, and that's not untrue. Yeah. But
most of the time.
But to have the ability to talk about, you know, how am I feeling, and what is it that, or what am I not feeling? You know, about a myriad of things, especially in this stage, because it affects so many other people. Kings, as you said earlier before the break, have an effect, an influence, have what they do and what they don't do, what they decide to do or not do. It impacts everybody who puts their stuff in that moving van, right? Of what it looks like at that stage, the accumulation. Not just of stuff, but of relationships and the accumulation of days and journey where, sometimes it's things that happen to you as a younger player using, you know, playing hurt and playing on. I that incapacitation you talked about in your early king stage, our late warrior stages. I mean, we were friends as old warriors before kings. And, you know, as Josh is moving, he's got a toe or two in the king stage. And so, but I think about the effect of some of those things literally on my body.
Yeah, right.
And the times that I have, could call it blues, call it, man, just sluggish season, tired.
Yeah, I don't have any juice.
And you know, depending on who wants to diagnose me, you know, depression. Yeah. Overwhelmed. Yeah. I remember my season of and a couple of panic attack. Right. Panic attacks, fear that feels, brutal. When it's this dread. Yeah. You know, and it comes from the responsibilities of because a good king, right, is providing and protecting.
Yeah.
That's big.
And when that is just, you don't know how you're going to get through, or the finances, or this deal didn't happen, or
Yeah, and I think
you feel the weight of all of that.
You mentioned the hesitancy to share with your wife, Lorna. I've felt that with Sherry too, because I'm supposed to provide and protect her.
Yeah. Yeah.
Provide for and protect her. So now, like,
Talk about it.
I'm going to talk about how that's not happening well. That
Or
doesn't
I'm not sure if we're going to
seem
get
like
through.
I'm engaged with my mandate as a king.
Yeah.
So then it's just isolating, man. And then as you're talking about your mom, because it's been a journey, I know. With getting your heart back, when you do risk sharing what's going on in your heart and sharing those feelings you talked about,
Yeah.
what happens to us a lot of the time is we share with someone and that person does not know how to listen to somebody.
Yeah.
So then it turns into, well, you know what you need to do. Or,
Or
well,
that's
in
the
my
last time.
story,
Yeah.
my story, this is what happened to me, and you ought
Yeah.
to listen. Now all of a sudden you're trying to share your heart, and they're talking about themselves, and it's just
Yeah, so I got to give an example. So before we really started rolling Zoe, and Keith's one of the original founders, right? Who you got your name on the federal papers, bro.
Yeah,
so I love to remind you of that from time to time. So, but we used to show a Patch Adams clip.
Yeah.
And it makes me think of that listening, where Patch Adams finally connects with somebody, comes in the next morning to the psychiatrist for their appointment. Patch says to him, I'm checking out. I want to help people. I really connected with somebody, and I want to help people with their problems. And he goes,
Yeah, he said, I really want to listen to people. And he said, well, that's what I do. And he said, yeah, but you suck at it.
yeah, because the whole time he's fiddling with his coffee and writing.
Oh my
reports.
gosh, it's the worst.
It is the worst.
But so where does a king go?
right.
Especially when he's been trained, it's not safe to go anywhere with your problems. That's why redeeming generational masculinity, I think, is a good idea. What if there were some men who could listen and not say, well, you know what you should do, or
not perfectly, right?
But,
people are going to make mistakes. We know that,
but be able to,
One of our anchor texts is that Proverbs, what is it, 23?
4:23.
4:23.
Yeah.
I had it reversed. Yeah, guard your heart, right?
Yeah.
What does guarding look like? I mean, guarding feels like defense to me.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like closure and
Protection.
right. I know what it means on a football field.
Yeah, right.
I know
right.
what it means on
And
a
we're gonna-
basketball court. What does it mean in
Caleb
life?
and Josh are going to get to talk about that even more next week, because you're supposed to have learned that in the warrior stage. And so if you didn't learn that in the warrior stage, the larger story, and I want to talk about that. I want to ask you a question about that in a second, Josh. But if you don't learn that in the warrior stage, then it carries on.
Right.
That naivety, that ignorance carries on, and now you've got kids coming up in the larger story. You've got evil that's
And you're training
lurking.
them
I mean,
one way or the other.
We
right?
just prayed
You're
for one of
training
our
your kids.
friends,
Right.
and his kingdom, and just to intercede on his behalf in the spiritual realm. So this is why the king stage is so important, because there's so much more privilege, should be, and responsibility there can be, that if a man isn't oriented in those earlier stages, you've got to go back and get healing and recover. So Josh, this question I had about having this perspective, what does, let me ask, not because I'm not implying, this is going to be an insult, not implying that you do this.
Since you know.
What does living small look like? Right? What does living small look like? And maybe we can all contribute. And how have you done that? Right.
Yeah, as I'm listening, and I'm truly thankful to be at the table listening. I'm at a place in my life where I'm still very much leaning in and learning and listening to and being loved by kings. Yet still have, as you mentioned, I'm married 13 years and 3 kids of my own, 10, 11, 12. So I have some kingdom. I have some dominion there too. And I think for me, the indicator, because I can't get this off my head since Keith was talking earlier, but also to tie it back to what you just said. So I think the indicator for me is when I began to realize the weight that my words had, whether that was at work, but certainly at home, more predominantly. My effect on the room when I walked in, my effect in the car, on car ride, And it's crazy. I'm with my kids all the time now. I'm a taxi service. That's what I think parenting teenagers prior to driver's license is. I'm just taking them everywhere that they're involved in. And my kids, when they're with me, it's just a different experience than what I hear the car ride with mom is like. I'm getting information about the kids from her, right? I can ask the question, and it's just a different. And so now I'm just like, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with Dad?
Right.
And
where did you learn that?
Yeah, sure. So to tie it back to your question, I think for so long, and I know we'll get into this next week with the Warrior conversation too, but for so long, I was just checking the box of it's my job to provide, so I got to work. And for most of our early childhood, I did ministry, and I worked 2 or 3 jobs in addition to that. It's my job to protect, to provide, and I'm going to check those boxes, and I'll be at the game, and I'm going to be a dad that's present, but I didn't engage. And so while I thought
that's really good,
I'm a very engaged dad, I'm a very engaged husband, I was completely oblivious to what was really happening and living small in that way. My story was small because I was here. I was focused here, not the whole picture.
Yeah, so naivety is not good. And when you realize that it's not just my presence, but it's my engagement, right? By the time you're a king, if you don't understand this, you'll be passive.
Right.
And passivity doesn't mean you're not present. Passivity means you're not engaged.
Oh, it's almost worse.
Right.
I mean, I would many times I'm like, Dad, why don't you yell at me? Because then I know at least you're paying attention.
Yeah.
You know? So, why didn't I get in trouble for that? I stole the car, for crying out loud.
So that's what I keep hearing these stories still about you that I'm like, wait, I don't know. I remember this stealing the car story. We'll have to add that to the podcast lineup.
Close to elder stage.
Yeah, I think about.
That's why you can't remember.
That's why you can't. Nice.
What was I talking about?
Yeah.
But when I think, Keith, when I lived small. It was just that idea that not aware. I just wasn't really initiated in some of the ways that we are talking about that we've covered and recovered a lot of that ground.
Mm-hmm. Ingredients of love.
But as a king, even as a warrior in that stage, I think it was just about me.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Providing and protecting me, and getting mine. And not getting hurt, and so I was at the center of the story, and I think because I learned that in my own storyline young, it carried with me
into a great point.
Into warrior and king stage, and I really wasn't initiated into the larger story, and I mean my dad provided, protected, but there were things that he wasn't validated in. Sure. Or initiated in. And so it was going to be a heck of a time struggle for him to do that to me and for me and with me, especially when we get a little older. And who was talking about, oh, yeah, you're driving him around. Man, that's when you actually have some time with him in the car.
Yeah.
You get 16, 17, 18. I mean, my dad was fortunate to make my game 2 hours away, because we're on high school teams now. We're moving in different directions at a very different pace. And so having the presence of a good man is important, but having the words and the intentionality, because a man recognizes that things he says carry weight. And there's things that you don't say that also that carries a weight. Your facial expressions, your engagement. So living small is really, really not good for the king stage.
What's it look like for you, Keith?
Well, this is another. All the questions are weighty. This one is hard. I almost feel like I need to pass on it. And the reason I say that is, as I'm processing through, when I so enjoy hearing another man's story and appreciating the journey that they're on. Right, like what you just shared, Josh. It took me to that time period in my life and wondering again, what was I like in the shuttle period, I've got 2 children, my son and daughter, Madison and Lauren. Lauren just moved out a couple weeks ago, as Mike may have mentioned earlier. My relationship with Madison has been, it's been glorious and hard, partly because of my profession and my world that I operate in. And it's just kind of him, the way I envision it is it's less words and it is presence. Mm-hmm. Observation, watching me, literally coming to the basketball court, for example, when he was little and being maybe even still in the car seat, and he's just around us, right? My father didn't give me lots of words, but I heard from other people how proud how proud he was of me. I had to think how to word that.
Yeah.
And that was constantly reinforced, and to the point where I didn't really need to hear it from him. And that's an interesting nuance. That's not everybody's
Right.
like, no, Dad, I need to hear the words, right? But over a period of time, I think this is where I will inject the Spirit into this, because this is where like all of us are at a loss. Without the Holy Spirit's help, I don't know at any moment in time how much or how little my influence has been by the words I said or didn't say. I'm praying that they are. It's so complex.
Yeah.
Like in that moment, like I'm gonna go back to Madison as soon as I get the next opportunity and say, I need to ask the question, where have I wounded you? Or what have I, and recently at an end of the year, we always have a little family time and say, how can we support each other more? But being asked the question.
What an intentional question. That's beautiful,
yeah,
man.
I think, and that's where I get convicted. Is like maybe I've been too small and being more intentional in asking, because I know you just know I'm the guy you just watch. Like if I'm under the hood now as I process the things the way my dad fathered me, and again having been divorced my mom at 10, only had every other weekend with him. I see the pattern so clearly in how I got so much goodness out of him, even though it wasn't a lot of engagement in the way that maybe you were kind of acknowledging we need to give, right? So just, again, negotiating that, processing it so that I don't collapse under really the weight of like, I'm always not big enough.
Yeah.
I'm always going to come up short somewhere in Madison's heart or my children's heart or my wife's heart. And that's honestly, it can lead to a sense of the other question, which is, can I even be a good dad? Right.
Mm-hmm.
Do I have what it takes?
Do I have what it
Yeah.
takes?
Yeah.
This is
And
good.
the coming up short thing, man, it's the wonderful way that God's kingdom works, his economy. We come up short because we're not him.
Yeah.
And so when we have our conversation with our children, right, about how we've come up short and let them down, we're human, we're not God.
Yes.
So if anything, maybe our shortcomings point to a need for God.
Amen.
In our children's lives.
So if you're not walking as a king, that need for fathering with God, Father God, if you're not walking that out, you really don't have much of that to offer them.
Right.
So this is a stage where your identity, if you've been taking, I think of panhandling, and I think of if you've been taking your questions, do you see me? Do you love what you see? Am I strong? Can I come through these other stages? The warrior, do I know the difference between good and evil? Could I stand up against it? Can I offer good things in strength and kindness? All of these questions. If your dad didn't model that, or in some ways even intentionally train you up in that, there's a father that he should be being fathered by. Mm-hmm. And so that's how the generational space is supposed to work. And so the beautiful thing is our dads, they really did what they could. And yet we've experienced in these last, you said 2004, 2005, these last couple decades, of what it is to be fathered by God, and how does that impact me in my kingdom to love well? Because really that subtitle in King Me, right, loving and leading in a wounding world, and those that are closest to me, your son, my daughters, your son, your children, that's what this king stage is so much about, and our wife, no doubt. And so to enter into, I need strength, and it's got to come from somewhere. What if it could come from the Trinity?
Yeah.
What if I knew who I was, because I know how God feels about me, what he thinks about me, who I am in the kingdom. Those kinds of training and those kinds of initiation lessons, that's where I think the king stage starts to become wild in terms of your ability to offer strength, because I'm not going to the world to find out if I am strong.
Right.
I'm going to the source
Right.
of my strength because I'm loved well and I'm loved deeply. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And it makes me think about the Encounter Weekend that's coming up at the end of April, 25th through the 28th.
Yeah. Nice plug. That was a good
yeah,
plug.
Yeah,
right
just
in
throwing it in there. But and we've got a lot of younger guys starting to come now, I think through invitation. But the vast majority of the guys that come there are in this stage to the encounter. And they are wondering, okay, something's not right. They've been in the king stage long enough. They've got enough influence. Maybe they've made some mistakes. Maybe they're estranged from their kids. Maybe they've gotten divorced. Maybe they've filed for bankruptcy. Whatever it is, they've got some miles behind them to say something's not right. And they come to the weekend hungry and thirsty and find out. And I know I look back and I was like, why did no one tell me this?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Why was there no generation ahead of me that shared this information and would have saved me a ton of heartache? You know, I mean, my journey has made me who I am now, right? I get that. So I'm not going to trade
always part
it in.
of it. But
I do look back and I say, where are the
kings
and the elder
kings
sages to
and the
say
good
those
elder
things
sages
to me?
Yeah.
So that's part of what we're trying to recover here.
And we're not talking about church guys. I mean,
not necessarily.
There's some good dudes in churches, you know, service and faithful and all that. But I think what we're talking about is those guys who have kind of stepped up and into a larger orientation, and you know, nothing wrong with teaching Sunday school. Love it. Mm-hmm. But we're talking about this coming into and experiencing not just the verses I need to memorize, but the weightiness and truth of them literally.
Right.
Like, he'll never leave me or forsake me. Great passage. Memorize that. You should. But when we were talking with that friend of ours, that we walked through some counseling time, it was Jesus actually told him that in a hotel room not too long ago, that you're. And it went full circle.
Where have you been, God?
Yeah,
I've always been here.
Yeah,
and he gentle, like hand on the shoulder kind of moment.
Keith, he heard it. He felt it.
Mm-hmm.
It was in his heart, in his head. That kind of expression of how you hear from God.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. I mean, he didn't even have to know that the verse is even in the Bible, because the one who authored the Bible told him that.
Right.
I thought that was just fantastic, and he will live on that for the rest of his days. These kinds of encounters with God that a man needs along the journey, I believe, so he can be entrusted, because you are gonna have influence and an effect, but that it could go well for you with particularly who and what is entrusted to you as a king.
Yeah, the encounter. Speaking, you know, that word encounter is another big word for me. We use it in our pilgrimage curriculum, taking people through the history of our city in Durham and stories about trailblazers in our community. And again, as I age and reflect more on life, given that, you know, I have more life behind me on this earth than I have in front of me necessarily, it is important to remember these encounters. And hopefully they don't get canceled out by the enemy's
and
fiery
enemy stuff.
darts,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like, I mean, I have a whole file. You don't have enough podcast episodes of files of experiences like that with God that I rarely talk about, because again, it's a guarding heart thing.
It's a holy thing. Yeah.
It's kind of like, you know, I was sharing Howard Thurman clip with some students this morning, and I was like, man, to taste and know that, and to see when he says, you know, sit down and have a session with yourself and know that you are okay. You know, God has made you good, and that be that armor for all the many times when I don't. My body's telling me everything out differently. You know, the periods of maybe you call them dryness, or maybe the enemy does sort of waylay you and something happening to your loved ones or close to you, and you're sort of undone for a moment. And I think that I always, again, in a Thurman-esque way, I have to stop and say, okay, all right, Lord, I need you to show up again in the impossibility of what that moment might be.
Yeah.
Even the what we just experienced before the podcast today, I had another friend who called me and described a scenario where he was waylaid and his wife was incapacitated as a result, how it affected the rest of his family. And I didn't know. And I finally reached out. I kind of knew some bits of it. So the attack is real. The encounters are real. Yeah. And I'm hoping that the encounters with the Spirit of the living God will over.
Yeah.
That's what we're praying for every man.
Yeah.
And I thank for the gift of Zoe Ministries in that way.
Thanks, Keith. This is, we got to wrap it up, but this part of this big idea is brotherhood, is friendship, and that's a trick, to be vulnerable, to open up, because we've been burned, we've been betrayed, we've been hurt, but we're so wired for this, And I know we're wired for a lot of kinds of relationships, but there's a part of this I just want to close and say that the opportunity, to kind of enter into this water, and to enter into training, and to enter into. I mean, the books are great. Not because I wrote them, but the books are great because they're helpful at exposing some of this,
seeing the field.
This thing, and an opportunity then to enter into this space with other men, like at Encounter, or small groups, or even to take one of those books and grab 2, 3, 4 guys, and say, man, let's see what.
Let's get coffee once a week.
Let's see what this knucklehead wrote about,
right.
and see, and let's tell some of our stories and enter into this space. So I think there's a quote in King Me. It's not mine. I stole it from Dan Allender, and Dan Allender says, "Find like-hearted kings moving in the same direction, and sign treaties with them." Right back to the warrior, the larger story, the enemy. You're in a war. Right? And you better know who your friends are. Yeah. You better know who's standing with you. You better know who's fighting for you and with you. And the victory's won, but we will have to go claim it again and again, because the enemy's relentless in their attempts to steal, kill, and destroy. Find like-hearted kings moving in the same direction. Sign treaties with them. And the rest of it is, and when you go to war, you have allies. You have friends, you have brothers that you can. I mean, the fact that your friend called you, right? Yeah. The fact that this friend of ours' wife called us. Right. The fact that this man found us and crawled into a foxhole for a couple days and said, "Man, I don't know what all is broken, hurt, but man, would you help me?" Mm-hmm. And it was beautiful. So this stage, I think, is also it's just so important. It's so powerful, because when a king gets taken out,
collateral damage.
It is expensive.
Absolutely.
In what
Way
happens.
Way more collateral damage.
And so
even in the stages beyond.
Yeah.
The bookends around it.
Yeah.
There's more collateral damage.
So there's more. And I'm so grateful that we could take. I always think we had 30 minutes, and then Caleb said, "Yeah, it went about 45 minutes." Yeah. And so, but there are some places that you can go get more, and I just want to share that with our listeners and our viewers, that Redeeming Generational Masculinity. There's a video series that we created.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You can find that at zoe.org/Elder Sage. It's a table of elder sages. Michael and his friends. Keith's on there, and just talking about this
masculinity.
Four conversations.
Yeah. So that's out there. We've got some other resources. Coming up on YouVersion Bible app is The Warrior King, Whose Image We Bear. That's a series that's coming up, and then you want to swing at Encounter real quick one more time?
Yeah, April 25th through the 28th. Come join us, zoe.org.
You could find some kings
events.
to sign treaties there. You know,
sure can.
And,
yeah. Lifelong friends have been made there.
Yeah.
No
so, so thank you, friends, allies, for joining us for another Exploring More podcast with my brothers. Appreciate you guys, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
We'll see you next time on the Exploring More podcast.
We hope you have enjoyed this episode of Exploring More. The landing page for this podcast is zoe.org/podcast. That's ZOWEH.org/podcast, where you can find the show notes and various platforms to which we broadcast. You can also find us and the Life of More by visiting Zoe on YouVersion Bible app, Right Now Media, our Facebook page, and Zoe on Instagram and Twitter. Remember, with God there is always more, and you were made for more.